poem is called Someone Else's Life, and God willing, it is the title poem to the next collection. So if we could all just, cross our fingers for that, that would be great. Someone Else's Life. The Easter weekend we spent in Austin in the nice hotel with the pool. Him and me lounging with margaritas while the girl, still too young to swim, made a new friend and splashed in the shallow end. I felt as if I were living someone else's life, and I liked it, walking up to the sleek bar with my big sunglasses and ordering a plate of chicken strips and ranch. I don't know what it means that I seem most real to myself when I pretend I'm a character in a story that isn't mine. The next morning, actual Easter, we burned our shoulders wandering paths of a wildflower sanctuary, a pit stop on the long drive home, only to realize we'd left her beloved rabbit with its torn ear and graying fur at the hotel. Already too far along to retrieve it, I rushed through the sanctuary gates past the flowers to the gift shop and bought a small stuffed bunny. We told the girl it was her rabbit's baby, asked her to name it, to take care of it. And she held that bunny so tenderly I thought I might break. As we drove the onslaught of papers to grade and clementines to buy and peel, dog hair collecting under kitchen cabinets, the strange loneliness again at the edges, all the while soft snoring from the back seat. I raised my eyes to the big Texas sky and asked not for a new life, but to be a new person in this one. To be a woman who lives happily in her body and not only in her imagination. If the sky heard me, it didn't say. Maybe it knew that years later, on another Easter Sunday, I'd miscarry while browning a tenderloin and wearing a Mom of the Year t-shirt the girl gave me. Even as the events were unfolding, I saw their irony. The disappearing child, the cave of me. Oh, Texas sky, I think I was wrong. I think sometimes a woman does need to leave her body, needs to float in the mind where any new animal can replace a lost one, and finding a cave empty isn't the end of the story. Oh sky, oh cave, can't you see how alone I am in this body? This next poem, I'll just say, has a reference to a possible assault. It's called Some Half-World. What can I say about how the snow is falling this morning, almost imperceptibly? I am a long way from the people I love. Distance, I'm discovering, is better in the imagination, though my imagination has been weak lately, caught in some half-world between memory and creation, either one a truer planet than this moon I've been hauling around. The sun crawls up the horizon and the light in the forest shifts, a pale white making space for the day's drama. I force myself to recall the man with the sharp chest hovering above me in a hotel room years ago. No matter how I try, I can't remember what happened after I woke and said stop. I see only a taxi door closing. And the next morning, snow on wet streets, an instinct to turn in on myself, to make of myself a hard, small marble. It would be a miracle to see you right now, my beloved writes. It's true, I am far away. A habit which, I understand, has been a mistake. This is one of a short series of prose poems that are thinking about sort of like shame and girlhood. This is called I Called My Shame. I called my shame a mother, grifter, deadwood, fire. I called it black water, fool's gold, worthless silt, nail in a truck tire. I told my shame you're on thin ice, roadkill. I shook its shoulders, I said, get it the hell together. I told my shame it would never be a plum, whole, unbroken, unbitten. My shame was rotten and I knew it. Apple even the deer wouldn't touch, bloated, gnatted, orchard probably disgusted. My shame listened up. My shame was in perilous condition. My shame needed help. My shame couldn't reach the counter or feed itself. I felt a little bad. My shame was kind of sweet. I told my shame it could hide with me. I brushed its hair. I shared my socks. We lived in a basement of tough love and dial-up. My shame got good grades. My shame kept the room clean. my shame kept a secret like a crow with a coin. Overfull recycling, we didn't like the yelling. I remember eating ham sandwiches in our bedroom alone. And I'll just read a couple from A Dangerous Place. This first one is to my daughter in springtime. If you ever catch a mayfly by the kitchen sink, break its legs to pieces, feel a little glory in the killing, though it was accidental. If you ever eat all the honey we bought to trap raccoons, lick the salt block on the tree stump, pull apart a green branch just to see what it looks like inside. If you ever stick a piece of trash in a prairie dog hole, curious whether the animal can still breathe down there, or watch a trout squirm and kick on the creek gravel gasping, even if you unravel every thread of yarn in the bird nest I showed you yesterday. And even if the little blue eggs fall through their ruined home toward a concrete driveway covered in chalk rainbows, I want you to know none of us knows what to do with wonder. Not one of us knows how to love the world. And then I'll finish with this one. It's after Robert Hass's fabulous poem, Faint Music. Maybe you need to write a poem about mercy. Start this one with the woman standing at the edge of the woods or the desert. It doesn't matter. What matters is she's standing under a darkening sky, and she knows at this point, having spent months in the hospital, that there's nothing she can do. No threshold between threat and tranquility, no demarcation she can draw around herself or her child for protection. Everything is actually everything else. The stone just kicked, and whatever comes next are the same. And knowing this, a great emptiness swells inside her stomach, an airiness she could float away on. And the night bellows, and the sun rings once more, then slips under the horizon. Maybe then, a humming of an old tune, her own hand stroking her red hair. Mercy. As in the story the man on the bus told me about his late wife, how by the end she'd forgotten their wedding even, and their children's names. And once she went missing in the depths of winter, bent on saving the cattle from the blizzard that years ago left all the calves frozen on their sides. He told me his wife saw angels. It was her last day. She was at home, and the nurse called him to the living room where the bed was. His wife asked, "Do you see them?" And he said, "Yes." And together they counted the wings. When he told me this story, the man wasn't sad. He had just picked up groceries to make bread. He missed fresh bread, he said, and so he bought yeast and flour and fine kosher salt. He wanted to watch the dough rise. Because the man wasn't sad, I tried not to be sad too. He smiled and got off the bus. Out there, the street lamps flickered and the cold night grew, and off he went to warm his kitchen. I waved and wondered if there's a word for the way joy and pain are the same. How, if we're lucky, they thread us like an electrical wire cuts a tree. And there we stand, tender and green, reaching, charged, humming. Thank you.
Stopwatch has been going for 769 hours, 8 minutes and 36 seconds. I'm going to reset that. Circles. They sent me to school in the great forest, planted by the timber company, where each morning the chaplain would pray to the trees. There was a river somewhere, but I was afraid to go down to it on account of the color of the water, menacingly clear, as though all the silt and leaves and branches and rocks had no real contact with anything. Things sat or floated on. That was it. Nothing mixed. I usually couldn't find the river anyway, and was always getting lost in the woods, until the wardens came galloping on their Arabians to bring me back for my punishment of competitive knitting. I never won, or even made a hat or scarf I would not be too embarrassed to wear, and so when winter came, I was not only chastened but chilled. That's when you found me, staring at the stopped clock, and showed me the way out. A ritual where we barred the door, turned up the halogen lamps, and stared at each other until we decided which swimsuits most flattered our blanched bodies, high-cut one-pieces or string bikinis. The parrot helped too, from his roost in the common room, even if he only said things he had been trained to say. What color? Be good. Wanna go. Wanna go. Thank you to all of you for coming, Chelsea, for reading with me. I'm here to promote Past Lives, published in July from Jackleg Press. And I'm going to read a couple of poems from the first section of the book, and then maybe one or two from the latter sections as well. Nautical maps. In the basement, we queued for our tickets. Things had been tough since the mandolin players broke the fingers of the ukulele players. Management had let the place go. Water rejoiced on the seams of the plaster, and the chatter of the bilge pumps kept breaking into the lulls of our conversation. I decided I needed to enlist to serve my country in the war on desert. It's tough work each day, this being mostly righteous, but subtle about it. Something had stared long enough to go blind. That's when it became a good idea to be sound. The captain didn't know where I could make a difference. He suggested I might try being an altar boy, but this didn't sit well with my wife. Beaufort, South Carolina is a small, picturesque town in my memory. A girl who lived there was once the person I most wanted to resemble. She had red hair, tending to pomegranate, and there were seashells tastefully arranged on the shelves of her living room, not to mention the nautical maps, painted with sailboats, full of philanthropists, and the otherwise insured. They were wearing too much plaid for my taste, but my taste doesn't count. I haven't been on a sailboat since the 90s, when I dropped a widget overboard into New York Harbor, and the Coast Guard renewed an interest in my uncle's career as a smuggler of rare birds. This isn't meant as a cautionary tale, strictly speaking. A lot of people have past lives they are covering up. For example, I was once an Episcopalian. I know, the embarrassment of it is really too much. I went for the singing, mostly. But this is, of course, what everyone says. I went for the singing, like they didn't have a choice in the matter. Missing the forest for the forest. Everything useful had been requisitioned to suppress the rebellion in the laboratories. Researchers were assembling ready-mades out of funnels, burners, and flasks, and nakedness like that, sometimes it's enough to make people pause. Police called headquarters and asked for the chief art historian in residence. There might be something to save in the decor. The chief convened a committee formed in the wake of the last insurrection, but the committee, saddened by their experience with the recent restoration, did not know if they had permission to give. I lingered over your letters, picking stray threads of twine, appreciating the steep angle of ink on the envelopes, the scent of paste and raked grass. Opening one, I found a brownish outline of a flower with its bouquet of dust, and read, as there was a timber of those lacquered chests, in which the bridal dress and veil will wait, as one might recognize on the wall of a painting of the artist's studio, a still life by that same artist, merely by a dash of color and line within color and line. So there is a quality of red that was not the red of blood or rust, but simultaneous to each living, unliving, in this I enclose. I would have read this letter to the meadows and streams. I would have read it to the confessors and the confessants. It would have been enough to wake that self who appears sometimes as a walk-on in the film we watch alone each night. But the dogs were beginning to bark, and besides, you asked me to burn them all. The buses were running, though few knew for how long, and they were crawling with eager caricaturists. Here, on the floor of the bakery, it was better to lie still, covered in sugar and flour, and wait for morning. So those are from the first section of this book. This book's got 3 sections. We both like the 3-section structure. First life, second life, third life in my case. And I'll read a couple of poems from Second Life and then one poem from the Third Life. And you'll probably hear that Second Life's poems are a little bit different. Dream work. Falling, parachutes hiss. Wind grammar is tears, salting the bridge from reason. Memory, green leash, flags in the heat. Hedges, hulls, crepe paper, wire. Sew the dress, golf in the olive grove. Whatever balcony glows, it's still always an unfinished room. Moon lover, shoot to rule. Vermilion boys stand, palms up, crystal bullet eyes wide. My. Default to Scotch. Default to West. The revolver's okay. Take that. Confidence man. Twist the stipple plate of glass into the sun. The arms around your neck abate. Their grip is wind on water. I see the silhouette aground, a massless ship peeling in wheat. Tar abscess where the captain's chair should be. Usez mais n'abusez pas stamps along the pen. Prokofiev was here tonight again with his lieutenant's woman's lips. Fortune rips what future sows, he said. The flies anesthetize themselves. Seagulls circle styrofoam. Roman prostitutes admire Mary. So I keep her pitted, clean. All right. So the last poem from the book from the Third Life section. Thank you all so much. Thanks to, is it Majors?
Majors and Quinn?
I've been saying Majors, like an imbecile here, and no one in town. Where are you reading? Where are you reading? What?
You're totally good.
I'm the Rude from Death South.
That's what I thought it was.
I've grown into that role. The way out is the way through. It's dawning now in the green afternoon light. You've been mistaken for someone else. Look around. The street is empty and silent. Houses and their motley of potted flowers and hanging ferns salute each other like old veterans. A lizard scrambles the tile of a Juliet balcony under trompe l'oeil blue. Nobody's fooled. There's no confetti, no photo op, no book signing. There will be no calls to the radio shows, no disarming the hosts with unpretentious banter. Obviously, schools, street signs, and plaques are out of the question, since there will be no scandal followed by a sufficiently contrite interview with a tough but tender anchorwoman, the one who wrote the book about being raised by nuns. Hardest to accept will be the lack of encomia by rivals, delivered grudgingly to their biographers long after your death. Most days, you just ask unanswerable questions to audiences too streetwise to believe there are no answers. And when you are not doing this, you are peeling ginger or dusting the bookshelves or washing the household underwear or taking mountains of boggy cardboard out to the sticky bins. There, on the ground, you find the wonderfully spherical nest with one small sandy egg still inside. How long can it last? No, it's already gone. Nothing of yours remains either, unless someone catches here something of themselves, lingers long enough, and before moving on and forgetting it for good, as you will, thinks it might be better this way, to be no one worth knowing. Thank you. Sit, and then you sit. Okay. Very good.
Do we want the microphones on or no microphones?
We can probably go without them.
Oh,
Can
perfect.
everybody hear okay?
Yeah. Perfect.
It's really nice to have you in the Twin Cities.
It's nice to be here.
Thanks for coming up. I was hoping I could start by asking you sort of an overarching question about the making of the book.
Okay.
So I'm excited to get into some of the particular themes of it. So here's sort of one of the questions I have as I was reading through it. I think I read somewhere that this book was written over a long period of time. And speaking for myself, one of the problems I can run into, and I think that all of us can run into when we're writing over a long period of time, is we sort of evolve past the person who wrote that thing earlier. And so when you're compiling, I think, a project with work over a long span of time, that can get kind of complicated. But then I was like, maybe Joshua's completely figured this out, because this is explicitly about different iterations of the self. So like, maybe this is the perfect book to write. Drawing from work over a period of time, and I just wondered if any of that was sticky, or if there's any chronological ordering in terms of when things were made and when they're in the book.
Or I might not have evolved. That's a distinct possibility, right? Some of the poems in the book I drafted when I was a much younger person, and I worked on them over a long period of time. And the problem I had actually was that I would go back and tinker with them and then feel like I had actually robbed them of what they had. So I guess what I ultimately decided to do was to sort of lean on the structure of the book to kind of validate the differences in the poems. In some cases, the differences are differences of chronology, but there's also differences in style, too. So I didn't have that worked out before I assembled them all together. And the process of assembling the book was a process of making orders, exchanging poems, removing poems, adding new poems. So yes, I think that it is a challenge, and that I lucked into this fact that I made the problem the topic of the book, I guess, right? Because Past Lives was it's a title I kind of came to late, even though it's in there, right? I think it's in one of the poems I read, but there were numerous other sort of iterations of that. But yeah, I think you raise a good point. I felt that your book was sort of mostly in a particular moment of your life, but then there were these sort of discrete excursions, right? The Black Hills,
Yeah,
for example. And one thing I wondered about your book, like place versus time. I feel like we kind of work in like sort of two different major concepts. And so for you, like, how much of the book is like rooted in particular places, or am I reading too much into that?
No, I think the whole book is rooted in place, and obviously like physical, geographical places, and also sort of thinking about the body and relationships as different places too.
And the psyche, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm in a good place, or I'm in a bad
Totally.
place. Yeah.
Yeah. But that was one of the sort of organizing principles that I needed for the book, and I had to conflate some places. I had like originally I had kind of like 4 going on, and it was just getting out of control, so I had to pull some things back together. But place was an easy way for me, not an easy way, but a way for me to think about like, where am I right now? How did I get here? What am I going to do about this? That tied to landscape to me. And then I think often in my work, landscape is a place I can go when I'm just trying to make sense of something.
Right.
Or when I'm writing a really bad poem, I need to like lean on something else. It's a place to move to.
Yeah. I was thinking of Bob Hass's poems when I was reading the book, even before I got to the poem that is inspired by Faint Music, which is just, if you don't know this poem, it's really incredible poem. I can't remember what collection it's in, but relatively early-ish Hass collection. And he too, right? Like so many of his poems are like rooted in place, but then there are also meditations simultaneously, and I felt like I could kind of see that sort of imprint. Were there other poets that you kind of had in mind when you were writing this book as like inspirations?
I was reading, so I had just in my first life I was a lawyer, so I had just left being a lawyer.
Nobody's perfect.
Yeah, no, major mistake. Trying to correct it right now. And so a lot of this book was written while I, had a toddler and a husband and was working on my MFA, and it sort of like just completely changed my life. And I got to my MFA program feeling like I was so behind the 8 ball. Like everyone was having these like conversations about all these contemporary poets, and like I was like writing names down phonetically, like trying to like Google them, and like I kept feeling like how will I ever be able to be have any sort of knowledge about this? I felt so behind. So there are poets I love and go to all the time. Robert Hass being one of them, and Ida Limon, and I think a lot of poets who are really sort of based in nature and place. But I was reading wildly because I was so scared.
I see.
So I was reading like broadly and
Okay.
crazily, trying to like catch up. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
Place is interesting to me in your collection too. So in this book, there's like, I don't know, maybe 100 different places.
There's some places.
Yeah, it moves around a lot. There are occasionally some, I mean, this is a huge compliment, some expat novelist vibes going on in some of these poems.
Okay.
Some of the like narrative abroad poems, and then there are these other poems that take place in a city, but the city's not named. And then there are moments where the speaker will mention, for example, Ohio, and that feels like a really grounded part of the speaker's memory.
Yeah.
But so much of the poems are sort of moving around to different cities or unnamed cities in a way that there wasn't necessarily like a deep grounding in a familiar home, and that seemed really purposeful to me and intentional. And I was thinking about what you said earlier about sort of assembling this, because it also feels very much, there's a lot of collage happening here, and assemblage, and a place too. And now I'm just talking around that, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about sort of how place and varied places work through the manuscript. Is it based on memory, or they also sometimes tie so much to the knowledge, like the cultivation of knowledge that's coming from where the poem is set?
Yeah. I'm a bit rootless.
Yeah.
And I'm a New York City kid, but that just means that my family has recently arrived from other places. I'm unrelated to the Adamses of American history. Anglicized. The Dom. Massachusetts, Washington, Chicago, New York. They're all places I've spent a lot of time, and they all kind of bleed into the book in different places. Prague, there's the expat
Yeah.
novelist. There's a poem in here called Bohemia Bagel, which I wrote it. There was, unfortunately now closed, a wonderful coffee shop in Prague called Bohemia Bagels, where I read John
It's
Ashbery.
reopened in Minneapolis. You can go.
Sorry?
It's down the road. It's reopened in
It's
Minneapolis.
reopened. It's great. It's terrific. I should bring them the book. That's where I read. So I read John Ashbery's self-portrait in a convex mirror for the first time at this place in Prague, and I was like 23, and I came late to Ashbery. And
Wait, is 23 late to Ashbury?
in my world, it's late.
It was late,
In
okay.
the world of the professional intellectuals, right, it's late.
Ooh.
It's embarrassing. Late. But for the rest of you, I'm happy to be with you. Yeah, so it kind of blew my mind a little bit. But yeah, I think that I wanted the voice of the book to be the sustaining thing rather than to be tied down to a particular location, because it reflects more of my sensibility. In that sense, that these books are kind of like opposed, which is to say, like, I feel like your poems are like so incredibly rooted, and like they just derive their power from how rooted they are, right? And I really love that. But I'm an air plant, I guess. I float around, send my spores out. I love the poem that you read, to your daughter in springtime. I love so much, and what I love about it is I'm not going to be able to find it right now. I thought maybe it was in the back. There it is. Yeah. What I love about it is just like how it just like keeps going down, like further down and into the prairie dog hole, and like the trout squirming and the gravel, and like it's just like, and then at the end, I want you to know none of us knows what to do with wonder. Not one of us knows how to love the world. And there's no punctuation at the end of it, which I think is just so, that's just so deft, like, just like, there's no end.
Yeah.
There's no end to it. That's really great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Should we open the floor, or do we just keep talking to each other? I mean,
I wanna ask you one more
go
question.
you can fire away, please. No.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, I'm happy to talk.
So this is maybe a question that you get frequently, but I'm so curious about it. Your critical text is out now, is that right?
No, it's coming out. It'll be
Okay.
out in the summertime.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a critical text on impersonality and skepticism in modern poetry.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, as a writer who's tackling like really in-depth critical work at the same time you're working on creative work, whether they feed each other practically, whether you have to put one aside while you turn to the other one, how you do that. I know a lot of writers are trying to juggle more than one project, and I'm so curious about what your practice and process is.
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, well, what I would say is that, so you have an MFA. I don't. So I thought about it, but I ended up going to graduate school for comparative literature, to a PhD instead. I would have been Ada Lamone's classmate.
Oh, is that right?
Or Ada, excuse me, at NYU, I think. Jennifer Knox and Ada were friends, and anyway, I've met them over the years. Anyway, I thought, well, I'll just do a PhD, and I'll just write poems like when I'm not, writing long research papers. And, that seemed moderately reasonable to me at 24, and it was completely not. Right? So what happened was, I went to graduate school, and I couldn't write, I didn't have time, and then I joined the staff of Chicago Review, and I was reading hundreds of submissions, and I was like, man, my poems they're not as good as the poems that we're rejecting. So I put it all away. And then as I was like in the depths of my dissertation, I thought, why am I doing any of this, right? Why am I studying literature in the first place? And that's when it sort of occurred to me that like I kind of lost touch with what I really needed. And so I started writing poems again.
That is so, I gotta say, I hate to interrupt, that is so funny, really.
hilarious.
to imagine,
I'm dying. I'm laughing so hard.
To imagine an editor at a literary magazine reading all these rejected poems that pour in day after day, and you thought, I can't write as well as these people. I've got to start working on my poetry. I mean, that's just a great story.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true. And I've told the story. Others will corroborate it. I did, and I also felt like I couldn't trade on the magazine. Be like, quid pro quo, which it might happen out there in the world. But
Apologies. I'm sorry to
no. Yeah, so I started writing poems again towards the end, and then when I got my teaching job, it was like a terrible job, teaching intensive, no rewards for promotion or whatever. And I thought, well, this research doesn't matter. I'm just going to really dig into the poetry, and that's sort of when I started putting this together. What I would say, sort of like thematically, so I think the link is that. So Alan Grossman, who's a great poet and thinker about poetry, should be better known. There's this book, Summa Lyrica, which is a primer of commonplaces in poetics. The beginning of that book, he's talking about lyric poetry, and he says, what lyric poetry does is it guarantees to us success, the limits of the autonomy of our will, in two respects. It promises us immortality to the extent that we can have it, because someone could read our poems after we're dead. And it also sort of gives us, maybe, access to another consciousness to the extent that it's possible. Of course, we know it's not really possible, right? But there's a sort of promise of it. And I think that skepticism about other minds and the first person in lyric poetry, they go together. And that's where my critical work and creative work are linked. So the poems aren't like about skepticism. They're not about impersonation, but they are conditioned, I guess, by those things. Yeah. So that's how I've now decided to explain the link between two things that are probably like
It's a dynamite answer.
incommensurate.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions out there? I have more I could ask you too.
I just had a couple of comments. I'm sorry to be so pushy, but I just had a couple. I had kind of a deja vu when I heard you read.
Deja vu.
I mean, like a flashback, and this probably is very insulting. This is Minnesota awkward in action, but it's like.
I thought it was nice. I thought you were supposed to be nice.
Officially.
It's a new phase.
Weird. I like it.
I thought about Richard Brodigan, and then you said, I wrote these when I was very young. I thought, maybe is it just all in my head? Probably. There's something about his kind of
I'm pretty
humor.
sure if I've read Brodigan, I don't remember.
I mean, it was so long ago.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
There's something in the humor of that first section.
Okay.
Then it
Yeah.
gets more serious and intense as
Right,
it
right.
goes on.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the other thing I just wanted to mention off the top of my head is that you were talking about place and time and the differences between your approach, but when you read your last poem, V. Josh, it reminded me of your poetry a little bit. There was something that didn't have to do with time or place, but it was this kind of there's a word for it, but it's like the mundane, everyday activities in your life that you go through, and you just endure them, and you have this sort of ironic feeling about them, but it's part of life. You're going through it. I wish I could give an example specifically, but this kind of existential, kind of melancholy but acceptance at the same time reminded me of the way you both have a kind of humor about it. I mean, it's funny. The way you talk about things happening in the kitchen or taking out the trash to the dumpster. There was something I was just interested that there was kind of a confluence there at the end.
There's so much. When I was rereading Chelsea's book, I felt like the weight of the ordinary was all over the place. And there's a great poem here towards the end of the book. Watching my daughter sleep, I remember when doctors said my breast milk would become toxic. And then it's a kind of catalog of all of these sort of things and desires that are just like sort of seamlessly a part of the maternal-child relationship on the daily, but they're so intense, right? That like, and easily overlooked. You know, I mean, the pathos of the ordinary, I guess I would say, rather than the weight of it.
It seemed like it both captured it very well. It was just a pleasure.
Yeah, self-preservation, the one about the omelet and the eggs too, you know, like, yeah.
Well, and your point about doing the laundry of the underwear, like, I was like
Oh, yeah.
jotting down notes as I was
Yeah.
reading your
Yeah.
book the first time through. You know, some of it was like there's
Yeah.
like such a fiery wit in here, and there's sort of like the absurdity of the dailiness.
There's so
You
much
know,
and
underwear.
this speaker
There's
will
just
sort
so
of like
much underwear.
track back into.
But you know, it
It's
seems to,
inexhaustible amounts of underwear.
if I could just say it seems to get to a meta aspect of poetry though. It seems like in a way, when you get that into this immediacy, also writing about poetry, you're writing about how it feels to go syllable by syllable, and they sort of connect in that way, in another way. Sorry.
Okay.
We got time.
I have two questions, one for each of you. Chelsea, loved everything you read. But also as a former lawyer, I'm personally wondering, have you found how that past life informs where you're at now, and do you feel there's a path to integration for those lives?
I can tell you what I hoped the path to integration would be, and I've not made it, so maybe you could carry the torch, and then I'll talk a little bit about the first part of your question. You know how there is narrative medicine, right? So they like work with healthcare providers, and this idea is through learning concepts of narrative, you'll be a better provider, and you'll also be able to handle sort of what you're facing in your jobs. But I think also part is that you'll become a better listener. And I was like, oh, lawyers should get this. There should be like narrative medicine, but for attorneys, where it's offering them the same sort of skills. So I had this idea that would be like this thing that was going to take off, but it's yours now, and you can give it.
They don't want to listen, turns out.
Well, I just as I was leaving my MFA, I was trying to figure out like what am I going to do, and like I had spent all this money on that degree and like all this time, like what could I do with them? And the honest truth is, for me, they haven't had much overlap or integration at all, except that I think I am much happier in my life now because of it. I think that I was just, I was also young, but I was sort of mindlessly just trying to do like whatever the next most impressive thing would be, or like what I thought in that like version of myself the next impressive thing would be. And that actually wasn't making me very happy. And so to be able to turn to poetry instead and have that like presentness and that meaning making, I know this is such like a cliche answer, but it's made a huge difference in my life.
You've never been tempted to repurpose legal language in poems?
No, I thought that I would, but also like Monica Youn, like people have done that so seamlessly and so well.
Yeah, Leyland Longsoldier does it.
Yeah. No, nope, it hasn't ever felt sort of natural.
Wallace Stevens kind of figured it out.
Yeah.
And there's a good book about Wallace Stevens and the law, his poetry and the law. It doesn't bring them together either, but it talks about the connection.
I compose classical music. I don't know if one art form is applicable to another, but somebody once said to me that essential elements are unity, continuity, and variety. And another sort of process, it's really a question about the creative process, is to put oneself in a zone, or allow oneself to be put into that zone, I should say, and then allow the whatever it is, or the things are, to let them lead you to wherever they're going to. So you're led. And then the necessity really of construction, almost like an architect, to make it cohesive. Are any of those, do any of those apply, and do any of those comments resonate?
Do you want to take it first?
What were the three elements again? Run it back for me.
Unity, continuity, and variety.
Right. I think in my poems I want to stress variety. Feeling that unity and continuity are expected from poetry now, I guess. Maybe not always. And so insofar as we're gonna renovate it, I think I'm gonna lean on variety as much, but I would say that unity and continuity are there. Whereas in a more vanguardist sort of project, they're gonna be totally rejected or attenuated even more. However, as I say that, I'm sure a really savvy critic would go through this book and like find unity and continuity where I thought I was escaping. So yeah, I guess I'm validating the claim. Yeah, I tend to think of my instinct is to think of poetry and music as more aligned than poetry and the visual arts. I think I'm in a minority actually in contemporary poetry. I think in contemporary poetry, visual and the hegemony of the visual arts have had enormous influence. I think contemporary poets are more likely to write thinking about their poems as artifacts that are encountered visually even before they're encountered hourly or orally. But maybe because I have a weird kind of formation, I've just never, I think it's great, but I've sort of, for me it's all about the sound. I will sacrifice almost anything for sound. Almost, not everything, but almost.
Yeah, I feel like one of the things that music and poetry have so clearly in common is silence, right? Like when we're going to utilize silence, when we're going to utilize white space. And I remember I wasn't a young poet, but I remember as a new poet being told like, oh, just follow the music. Follow the music is what people would tell me, and I was like, what are we talking about? Like, where is the music coming from? Like, how can I follow? Like, I'm creating it, so how can I follow it? And then actually, it was Robert Hass's poem "Faint Music," and trying to recreate, trying to imitate that and learn from it and write my own versions of it that were truly in my own development. Was the first time where I felt like the music was just kind of coming, whatever, there were just these kernels of sound in front of me, and I just had to follow those kernels of sound, and it felt kind of organic for the first time, and that felt like a really important point in my learning as a poet, because it was the first time I felt like I might kind of understand what people are talking about when they say follow the music. So the other thing that came to mind, and I don't know if this is on point or not, but one of the things we think about a lot in poetry workshops and in poetry classes is what sort of expectations we're setting for our reader and when we're going to break those expectations, and that seems sort of aligned maybe with unity and variety too, like when we're going to break the cohesion and when we're going to go back to it, and what sort of impact that might have on our reader. I don't know if any of
No, it's a discussion.
Yeah.
There's not an answer.
Yeah.
It's a discussion.
Yeah.
I think Hass is a good example, right? Because he's not obviously a poet whose soundscape's very rich, but there's a music of speech in Hass's work, and that I think that too is sort of an underused, underutilized, under-theorized resource. It's the music of speech.
So I have to confess I haven't read your book, but thank you
It's
for
okay.
promoting it because
It's all right.
I'll buy it.
Great. Terrific.
Um,
Yeah. I just assumed you were going to, but now you've told all these people that you're going to do it.
I am. But I generally am always intrigued by place as a writer and reader. And in poetry and in certain prose, a strong sense of place is really an anchor
Setting.
for me.
Right? Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, Chelsea had mentioned in some of your poems, there's a really, a specified location,
Yeah.
and then other times there's a city but it's unnamed.
Yeah.
And so one of my favorite books is by Luis Bernieres. There's actually a trilogy, and it's like probably Colombia, but it's an unknown,
Yeah.
it's an unnamed country in
Right.
South America. And so I can see as I read his books, like, why he would do that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it gives him some artistic license. Obviously, it's not throwing the culture under the bus,
Yeah.
because he can be pretty critical of some of its
Right.
aspects of Colombian culture. So I'm just curious, what was your intention and deliberation in having these cityscapes that you don't name?
If it's helpful, I was thinking of things like Come What May.
Come what may, yeah.
Okay.
That's the poem with the angel of death.
Yes,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
In the unnamed city.
exactly, yep.
Yeah. Right.
Is it part of, is it to reflect this rootlessness that you feel in your lives?
I mean, I think it's in part, it's the sensibility, but I also think that it's a kind of common feature of surrealist and surrealist inflected poetries to kind of like, on the one hand, occupy a space that is legible and familiar, but then also estranged. And that's a kind of motif of surrealism that sort of moves through 20th century literature into Latin American literature, like famously, right? And so, and also into American poetry in the 60s and 70s when people like Bly and Strand are translating poets from Central and South America and also Eastern Europe who are doing this kind of a thing. And, I think Strand is a poet I learned a lot from, and the first poetry he never gave, I had to go after him. That was a real trial by fire. Yeah.
You can do anything after that.
Yeah, these undergraduates at the University of Chicago started this magazine. They accepted some of my poems. They're like, come to the launch. And Strand was their like notional faculty advisor. And, so they gave him first, dibs. So he gets up there and he's tall and handsome. I had to follow him. Yeah. But anyway, made a strong impact on me. And I think that there's a freedom, right? It's a sort of imaginative freedom, but then also freedom of the reader, kind of like insert themselves or like make things up. And I think I'm attracted to that.
Yeah.
I guess I would say that the book is like the opposite of documentary poetics. Like the strengths of documentary poetics, whatever they are, right, are like totally refused by whatever it is I'm doing. And I'm happy for both of those projects to kind of be in the real world. But like one issue is like you read Strand, for example, and there's no concrete specific references ever. And at a certain point, you do hunger for that. And maybe that accounts for the fact that there are occasionally located in Ohio,
Yeah.
right? Which is, for me, like both a place and a non-place. And, yeah.
We have time for one or two more questions. If we have any more questions or comments, feel free. Otherwise,
If anybody else wants to go, please do. I just wanted to say, I think there's a music of thought,
Sure.
and both of you, I think, get something really rich out of that. It's not a place, it's more a concept or it's like an existential thing. I don't know I can't put it into words, but I think your poems sort of get at the crux of sort of the dilemma of life and being alive in different ways and very interesting ways. And I think of the music of reasoning and thinking and trying to understand is a kind of music too. And that's there in both of what you're doing, I think.
Yeah, certainly in past lives.
Can I? So there's one poem in your book that is different from the others. In that it appears to de-emphasize first person. And I was so struck by this. Can I read this? This poem is so great. I feel like I really desperately want to read it. It's called Covenant. One morning, all the nuns in the convent started meowing, mewing and purring until even the holy roof above them arched and curled. a feverish chorus slinking around the Christ figure's legs. Then it ended. The nuns gathered for dinner in silence. But the meowing had been unbearable to the townsmen, so they arrived with leather and horses and whipped the animal from each woman. And that's the thing about marriage. You take a vow. You give up your animal. Like, holy shit. Where did that always looks so incredible.
Thank
Like,
you.
where did that come from?
I
I mean, like, I like read it like 50 times, and I was like, Jesus fucking Christ, it's so good.
Send it to the Pope, you know.
You give up your animal.
Yeah. I think, this would be interesting to keep talking about sometime. At some point once I realized I was writing a book, and it was
Yeah.
like a long time before I realized I was writing something that like could be cohesive and could be a book. At some point I had been writing these really urgent, difficult poems, and I was really tired of my own voice, and I was really tired of writing about myself, and I couldn't imagine people were gonna wanna like, that would be enough, that, and so that one in particular, I was like, I just have to try something new. I'm so tired of the ish that I'm writing, and I have to like move into some new territory. And it was so fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really.
Sorry I cursed, I know you were.
No, no, please, no.
This is
Would've
okay.
been first.
You're all, there's no kids in here. We're all good. But yeah, any other questions, comments? Otherwise, thank you so much, Chelsea and Joshua.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we will meet everybody at the glass display case too.